Hey everyone, and welcome back to The Explainer. Today, we are taking a seriously monumental journey through 5,000 years of history. We're unpacking the world's longest continuous civilization, China. From its ancient mythological origins and those legendary early dynasties, all the way to its brutal collision with the modern globalized world, we're going to look at exactly how this incredible civilization was built, destroyed, and rebuilt over and over and over again.
It's a pretty fascinating question, isn't it? While distant ancient empires like Rome or Persia rose up and then ultimately just fell to dust, China continually bounced back through countless dynasties and emperors. So how did they pull that off? Well, the answer really lies in a repeating historical pattern. This relentless, almost inevitable cycle of unification, golden ages, catastrophic collapse, and then incredible restoration.
All right, let's just dive right into this. To give you a bit of a mental map, we've broken this massive timeline down into 5 key eras: the Mandate of Heaven, forging a unified empire, golden ages and innovations, conquest and restoration, and finally, the century of humiliation.
Okay, starting with Section 1, the Mandate of Heaven, the ancient dynastic cycle.
So, to really grasp this ancient cycle, we have to start at China's agricultural roots along the Yellow River. This is where legendary figures like Yu the engineer tamed these massive, deadly floods to build the very first dynasties. But the ultimate lens through which all of this history is viewed is this concept called the Mandate of Heaven. Basically, it's this philosophical principle stating that heaven gives noblemen the power to rule, but, and this is key, it will absolutely revoke that power if they become unjust. For example, when the final ruler of the Xia dynasty, Jie, descended into total cruel sadism, heaven supposedly revoked his mandate, which then granted a brand new power, the divine right to overthrow him. So after the Shah, the Shang dynasty emerged, and they gave us the first written history, literally carved into oracle bones. Then, seizing that mandate of heaven we just talked about, the Zhou dynasty swooped in and began a staggering 789-year reign. During this time, the Chinese made this massive technological leap. They moved past bronze and figured out how to cast iron in heat-resistant clay molds. This meant they could mass-produce weapons and farming tools, completely propelling their society forward.
But of course, nothing lasts forever. The Zhao dynasty eventually fractured into instability, which led to an era known as the 100 Years of Thought. And this brilliantly illustrates the two totally opposing philosophies that would go on to govern China for millennia. On one hand, you've got Confucius, who believed in natural human goodness, social harmony, and the benevolent family unit. But on the exact opposite side, you have legalism, championed by Han Feizi. Legalism argued that humans are inherently bad, and you actually need terrifying, strictly enforced punishments just to maintain a functioning society.
Moving on to Section 2, forging a unified empire, from warring states to the first emperor.
So as the Zhou dynasty completely collapses, China plunges into the warring states period. This was a brutally bloody era where 7 distinct kingdoms fought ruthlessly for ultimate control, using massive infantries, iron swords, you name it. But emerging from this absolute chaos was the Qin dynasty, led by Zheng, the man who had become China's first true emperor. And he ruled with absolute, unapologetic legalist ruthlessness. The guy survived a dramatic poisoned dagger assassination attempt only to become even more obsessive. He subjugated citizens, forced unity by standardizing writing and currency, and in this incredibly paranoid bid to erase opposing ideas, he notoriously burned books and literally buried 460 Confucian scholars alive.
700,000. Just let that number sink in for a second. That is the astonishing estimated number of workers required to build Zheng's massive underground terracotta army. He was so obsessed with his own mortality. Ironically, he died at 49 after drinking potions laced with mercury that were supposed to make him immortal. But he prepared for the afterlife by having this massive underground acropolis built. It was completely filled with individually detailed clay warriors armed with real weapons, basically ensuring his iron grip extended right into death.
Now, following the brutal and pretty short-lived collapse of the Qin, a peasant rebel named Liu Bang seized power and established the Han dynasty. And honestly, this was a massive breath of fresh air. They slashed taxes, they threw out that harsh legalism in favor of Confucian family virtues, and they set up a civil service based on actual merit, not just your bloodline. Plus, they pushed westward, establishing the legendary Silk Road, which kicked off this unprecedented era of cultural exchange and economic stability. All right, Section 3, Golden Ages and Innovations, the Tang and Song dynasties. Now, after the Han eventually fractured, China went through centuries of chaos before the empire was unified once again. And this proves a really crucial point. Internal stability is what paves the way for massive external growth. Under the Tang and later the Song dynasty, China's population ballooned to 80 million people. The capital, Chang'an, became the largest city in the world with over 2 million inhabitants. They revamped the civil service exams, the printing press allowed for the invention of paper money, and the magnetic compass completely revolutionized navigation. It was a true golden age.
And of course, we absolutely cannot talk about innovation without talking about gunpowder. Sometime back in the 9th century, there's this unknown Tang Dynasty monk practicing alchemy, right? He's trying to create a magical elixir to heal ailments and literally prolong his lifespan. So he mixes saltpeter, charcoal, and sulfur. But instead of immortality, he accidentally scorches his own skin and burns the entire building to the ground. It's kind of funny when you think about it, this slightly humorous origin for an invention that would permanently alter the course of human warfare.
But sadly, this golden era was severely interrupted. 20%. That staggering figure is the estimated percentage of the Tang Empire's entire population that was wiped out during the catastrophic An-Lushan rebellion in the 8th century. It was an unbelievably brutal internal conflict full of mass starvation and siege warfare. It mortally wounded the Tang's golden age and left the empire severely weakened.
Which leads us to Section 4, Conquest and Restoration, the Mongol invasions and the Ming revival.
So with the Chinese dynasties fractured and weakened once more, a terrifying new threat emerges from the barbarian wilderness of the northern steppes, and they easily break right past the Great Wall. 40 million people. That is the jaw-dropping estimated death toll attributed to Genghis Khan and his Mongol forces. Genghis used vicious psychological warfare. They would sometimes slaughter entire civilian populations just to spread fear, which caused neighboring cities to simply surrender without even putting up a fight. By 1279, his grandson Kublai Khan finally conquered the southern Song, making him the very first non-native to rule all of China.
Now, under Kublai Khan's new Yuan dynasty, they established a highly rigid four-tier caste system. The Mongols obviously held absolute power up at the top, while the native ethnic Chinese, and especially the southern Chinese, were shoved to the absolute bottom of society. They were barred from holding any real power and were even forbidden from owning weapons or certain animals in this very deliberate effort to snuff out any chance of a rebellion.
But, empires always overstretch. Plagues, famine, and massive peasant rebellions eventually broke the Mongol grip. A former Buddhist monk and peasant leader named Zhu Yuanzhang managed to reclaim the mandate of heaven, establishing the famous Ming dynasty. And the Ming did not mess around. They violently expelled the Mongols, obsessively revived traditional Han culture and Confucianism, built an astonishing standing army of over 1 million men, and they poured massive resources into expanding the Great Wall into that massive, iconic structure we all recognize today.
Finally, we reach Section 5, the Century of Humiliation, the crumbling of the dynastic cycle.
Let's fast forward to the 19th century. The Ming have fallen. They've been replaced by another non-native dynasty called the Manchurian Qing. And the ancient cycle is facing a totally unprecedented threat: modern Western imperialism. Now, the Qing dynasty heavily restricted foreign trade through the Canton system to protect their culture and their authority. But the British East India Company was desperate. They had this massive trade deficit from buying up Chinese tea, so they began smuggling thousands of chests of illegal opium directly into China. This sparked mass addiction across the empire and rapidly drained China's silver, which naturally led to a massive, forceful crackdown by Qing officials. Well, when the Chinese destroyed all that opium, the British retaliated with vastly superior naval bombardments, kicking off the infamous Opium Wars. The Qing were utterly humiliated. They were forced at gunpoint to sign what became known as the unequal treaties. They had to pay out millions in silver, hand over the island of Hong Kong entirely, open their most vital ports to the west, and even allow foreign embassies right inside Beijing. Basically, their economic independence was totally shattered. And honestly, as if that external pressure wasn't bad enough, severe internal rot set in, highlighted by one of history's wildest micronarratives. There was this delirious school teacher named Hong Xiuquan. He failed his civil service exams multiple times, suffered a complete mental breakdown, and had this intense fever dream that convinced him he was the literal younger brother of Jesus Christ. He went on to create a fanatical cult, militarized thousands of desperate peasants, and actually managed to capture the major city of Nanjing. We really have to emphasize the sheer horror of this next figure. 20 to 30 million lives lost. That is the death toll of Hong Xiuquan's Taiping Rebellion. It remains one of the absolute bloodiest civil wars in the history of the entire world. The Qing dynasty was literally tearing itself apart from the inside, all while being carved up by Western powers from the outside. So for 5,000 years, China operated on the cyclical mandate of heaven, unifying, falling apart, and rising again. But the sheer trauma of the 19th century permanently broke that ancient cycle. So what does this all mean for us today? How did the ashes of that century of humiliation directly pave the way for the modern, global superpower we see right now? It's a fascinating question, and understanding this deep 5,000-year foundation is really the only way to find the answer. Thank you so much for joining us on this explainer, and hey, keep questioning the history around you.